Okay, good afternoon, hello, and welcome everybody. My name is Bruce, and I want to thank you for giving up a small amount of your time this afternoon from whatever time zone you're in all around the world to join the session that Dominic and I are going to deliver. It's about adapting the MOOC concept, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, to work much better with teenagers. So I'm going to start by posing you the same question that Dominic and I faced about a year or so ago. What would you do if you had plenty of great expert teachers but no real effective way of distributing them around students who really wanted to learn from them? Well, that was a question we faced, and our answer was to come up with something that we call United Classroom. And I'd like to introduce Dominic, who is going to lead the session and explain exactly what we did. There is a slide deck in the presentation. You may need to click on it, and that will illustrate the content that he's going to show. And I'll be watching the chat bar to hopefully answer some of your questions as we flow through. Dominic.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Bruce, please do interrupt if my audio goes down or if you've got...
Will do.
As learning in the UK, I'm the group director of technology. I'm a history teacher and my way a technical specialist. One of the best learning. So what are we going to cover in the next 30 minutes, just to manage your expectations? We're going to talk about 5 things, so you can measure our progress through the presentation. I always think helps it go a little bit quicker. The first thing is we're going to talk about who we as a group of schools are. We're going to talk about the problem that we had, so why we needed what we call United Classroom. We're going to talk to you about what we're doing right now with it and the progress we're making. The lessons we've learned is the 4th thing, and finally our future plans for the next couple of years' development. At the end, hopefully, if we don't talk for too long, there'll be time to answer any questions that have come up. As you know, you've probably read in the instructions, on the Google Plus page for this presentation, you can write questions. Bruce is going to collate them if there are lots and lots of them, or if there aren't that many of them, I'll put them to me individually. Hopefully we'll get a chance to do that at the end. Okay, so who are United Learning is the first thing to talk about. Well, United Learning is a group of schools in England. On that blue map. Branding, I should point out, this isn't just a representation of how the country voted 2 days ago in our general election, if you've been following international news. And it's no spoiler really, it voted blue much, and we now have blue because that's always been our colour. Now, schools are really diverse. Firstly, they're geographically spread. You can see that we've got some right at the top of the country there, so numbers 30 and 31 are in a town called Carlisle, which is one end of Hadrian's Wall, history fans, and the other end of that wall, almost the other end, we've got a school in Sunderland. And then right down the bottom of the country, from small towns like Poole to big urban centres like East London and West London. Some of these schools are tiny North schools that have young 18 months or through to 18. And what the neat thing about the schools is some schools are funded by the government. 2/3 of them are government funded. And the other third are funded by fees. So parents pay to send their children to private schools, and there are 13 private schools within the group. So the group is pretty unique in its combination of public and private finance in that way. I'll try and keep pace. The slides keep pace with what I'm saying. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? So we work with technology funding. The technology department's raison d'etre is to support the effective use of technology in teaching and learning. There's also quite a lot of back office things to actually make things work as well. So we lead the advanced and we try and get a strategic process of one of these big something that the sum of our parts. We could something a lot. So what problem are we trying to solve? It's really schools working together, and it's virtually impossible. Good teachers from one school to teach children from another. There's only really one solution, and that's the technological one. So we have some very specific issues to try to solve as well. We'll be familiar to anyone in the UK, maybe some of you internationally. So many of our schools had sixth form. Those are 17 and 18-year-olds. It's the bit of their schooling that they do just before they go to university. Many of those schools, their sixth forms are really struggling with numbers. So children would typically go elsewhere at the end of their mandatory education period at the age of 16. They go to another school or further education college. Now, this is a big problem for those schools and for our group, because we believe that schools are most effective when they've got a strong, vibrant sixth form full of role models, so that children lower down the school can see what they're aiming for. So we really want to support those sixth forms. Secondly, many of our schools, particularly in the north of the country, and England has got this interesting north-south divide, really struggle to recruit specialist teachers in specific subjects. Maths is a problem nationwide in the UK, and we're no different. Physics is another one where it's just really hard to find well-qualified, good teachers to deliver those subjects. So what that's led to in some schools, which is obviously far from ideal, is some non-specialist teaching subjects, where the school feels it absolutely has to offer let's say physics A-Level, but hasn't got a physicist. Sometimes that A-Level might be taught by a chemist or a biologist, which isn't great for the teacher or for the children. Schools that don't use non-specialist teaching to cover those gaps, the only other choice they have is to limit that choice for students, to say we're not delivering these courses. And that's really quite troubling, really, to us, because A-Levels are the gateway to the rest of these children's lives. It's the way you get into university. It's the starting point on a career. If you can't study physics A-Level and you want to be some form of doctor, scientist, architect, pilot, that could be quite problematic. So in summary, access to the right course, taught well, is at the moment far too dependent on where you live. Another idiom for you is what in the UK is often called a postcode lottery. So your chances are just dictated by some random chance about where you live. So you're probably thinking with all of this, well, this is not a new problem. There's pretty well-established solutions for this. Distance learning's been going in Australia since 1940-something. Couldn't you just set up a MOOC or something similar? And we had exactly the same thought, and that was our initial plan. But we looked into that in quite a lot of detail and stumbled upon quite a few issues. I took as part of the research, I did a MOOC myself. I taught myself how to program in Python. I took a MOOC from the University of somewhere in Texas. I want to say Rice, and it was really tough, really very tough, hard to do, even as an adult. And it taught me a lot about why MOOCs, in their purest form, designed for higher education, probably won't work with secondary age students. So I'm going to pass you back to Bruce, who's going to talk through some of these specific issues we had with MOOCs. Bruce. You're on mute, Bruce.
I was on mute. Apologies for that. I'm now off mute. Thanks, Dominic. So as Dominic says, it would have been, I think, really easy to jump straight in and pull an answer to the issues that we've talked about there straight off the shelf with some existing tools, and I'm sure lots of you out there will know of them, perhaps even use them. In other words, it would have been really, really easy to jump straight in and create our own massive open online course or MOOC, as you know. We certainly had the capacity and we certainly had the expertise to do that very, very quickly. But within the group and our team, we've got a fair amount of teaching experience and a fair amount of experience with working with children and particularly teenagers, which the course was going to be aimed at. And we kind of thought straight away that the MOOC concept just wouldn't work, and we really didn't want this project to fail, and certainly not to fail in the first few weeks. So let's just explore those issues in a bit more detail. MOOCs require users, or in our case teenagers, to opt in, right, and to be really proactive about their learning. And I'm sure there's lots of you out there that know teenagers just as well as we do, and you know, perhaps that wasn't going to happen, let's be honest. So neither of us are going to sit here and be critical of the brilliant students that we or you work with within all our schools. But that being said, we thought we needed to be realistic, and recognise that perhaps, you know, let's be honest, that some teenagers are not going to opt in, not going to be proactive, or at least if they were in the MOOC, that they might drop out. MOOCs more generally within the further ed and adult space do have a high dropout rate. That's quite well proven, that's quite well documented, and within United Learning we just frankly couldn't allow that to happen. Dominic will talk more about this in a second, but we're not messing around with this project. This initial phase and the following phases are going to lead to proper, formal, public qualifications through examinations that will clearly affect the students' future. So we just couldn't let them fail, and we couldn't let them kind of drop out. We also wanted the learning within the experience the children were having to be live and to be social, but we needed control over that, and we were intensely aware of the e-safety issues that might be presented by a MOOC of the sort of traditional size and scale. But nevertheless, we wanted an answer, and what we've come up with is a variant, a SPOC, if you will. So yes, an online environment, but very small and very private in the first instance. So I'm going to hand back to Dominic now after discussing some of those issues. So he's going to explain not only what the design of the system was, but how we blended it with an existing live and very successful social learning situation. He's also going to talk a little bit about how we de-risked it, how we thought let's avoid doing these things so it doesn't fail. Before I do that, needless to say, it was the existing relationship that our organisation had with Google, and our knowledge of the GAFE, of the Google Apps for Education tools, that provided the right partnership and the right tool set to make the project a success. Dominic.
Thanks, Bruce. So how did we make it work then? So what did we decide to do? Well, as with any big project, we started with a proof of concept. As Bruce has said, this is real children that we're experimenting on. There are ethical questions here. We weren't just going to launch something in a haphazard way and see it fail, because children only get one chance at this, and this is a particularly important part of their education. So we wanted to find out, is this an ethical use of students' time? So we decided to start with where the opportunity was, really. I'd met one of the teachers in the group who I felt was quite extraordinary. His name, and here's a very unflattering picture of him, his name is Rob. He works for Surbiton High School. Surbiton is I suppose, a suburb of London, West London. Now Rob he's a qualified teacher, has been teaching for many years, but his background is in astrophysics. In fact, he has a PhD in astrophysics, and the name of his thesis comes up there, the recombination processes in photoionized plasmas. That was his PhD thesis. He is, in a quite literal sense, a rocket scientist, which is quite a good thing to be if you're also a teacher of physics. He's also a fantastic, charismatic classroom presence with a good deal of facility in technology. So he's not fazed by using technology in his teaching at all. So we spoke about opportunities, and I thought he was someone we could use to build our SPOC around. So we decided to offer, in the first instance, GCSE astronomy. Now GCSE is a level of qualifications below A-Level, so it's typically studied by 15 and 16-year-olds in the UK. So we thought, let's try and make this as easy as possible so that no one fails. Let's do it just in 2 schools to begin with. So some of the students were at Rob's school, and some of them were at a school in London, in Lambeth. Let's do it after school, not as part of the school day. So let's have this as an addition. So if it goes horribly wrong, they haven't lost anything. And let's choose students with an aptitude for science already who are interested. So on those kind of de-risk criteria, we decided to try and teach it over a very short period. We started in September 2014, and the children are sitting their terminal examination next Friday. So it's almost over, and we've taught a 2-year course, 1 hour a week, to a small number of children, 8 to begin with, and they're all on track to get a decent GCSE in this. So we demonstrated essentially that it would work based on these criteria. One, you've got to have a great teacher, we thought. Without that, nothing's ever going, no technology can transcend poor teaching, as the saying goes. We knew it had to have what we describe as, or what the literature around this describes as, live participative events, which you'll probably recognize as being lessons. It doesn't work as a set of recorded videos. Khan Academy and your general MOOCs, they're all very well for individual, highly motivated students who've gone in search of something. As a way of delivering content routinely, week after week after week, it didn't really have the sticking power. So we wanted the children to be doing something that they felt they were part of, where they could talk, they could put their hand up, they could work with people. It was part of the social process of learning. We wanted it to be about more than just the teacher talking to the students as well. We wanted there to be lots of ways of them communicating. And we're going to see an example in a minute of some of this. This ended up working really very well and led to what Rob describes, his phrase is good whispers for all to hear. The chat panel going down the side of the Hangouts that we used was like the opposite of the note being passed around the class for nefarious purposes. It was a non-intrusive way of everyone talking about the things that we were learning. It worked really well. We wanted to make sure that most of the learning tasks were collaborative, that drew on the power of things like Google Docs so that children could work together live. We wanted it to, for lots of the information to go in an independent way before and after the lessons. So this did actually lend itself really well to the internet as well. Finally, there was an awful lot of preparation for the teachers and students to do. We didn't want any of that to be wasted. We wanted everybody to be able to access this information after the fact. So we used lesson capture software so that the children could, at any point after the lesson, go back and have a look at it. They could watch the 30 seconds they hadn't understood, maybe repeatedly, until they got the concept. And this proved really, really valuable. Now, the next slide, I'm just going to show you a hyper sped up screen capture of one of the sessions going on there. It has, you've got multiple participants, you can see down the bottom, they're editing a Google Doc together. This is one of the collaborative tasks where they're being asked to gather information on different solar system things. I must admit, having sat in the back of some of these lessons, I was very, very quickly left behind by the 14 and 15-year-olds. Down the right-hand side is the group chat going on, which is a combination of children asking questions, teachers answering questions, and children answering questions. And one of the most brilliant things that we saw in this was, I was watching one of the videos one day where a child asked a deeply complex question about the weight of light and why light doesn't weigh anything. And Rob was explaining this with proper scientific detail. At the same time he was doing this, one of the other children was answering the question in the chat with the same information, pretty much. Not word for word, maybe not some of the right vocabulary, but was able to help their peer. And that's just a feature of online environments that we weren't necessarily expecting, but has proved to be really, really powerful. Let's move on. So that was the pilot. The technology behind it, well, probably won't come as much of a surprise to anyone here that it was largely Google-based. We started by talking to lots of other companies. We went to a well-known operating system manufacturer and a fruit-based manufacturer of tablet devices, and we told them what we wanted to do, and they said, "That sounds brilliant. Good luck." And that was about all we got out of them. When we went to Google, and I must really give thanks here to a guy called Adam Stewart at Google UK. He was just very different. He just said, "That sounds brilliant. What can we do to help?" And I'm not talking about money. There was no money involved. Well, we didn't need any. It was all free. But actually, just removing removing barriers, helping us to do things that we wouldn't understand. So getting the domain set up, making sure all the schools could access that domain from their domains, showing us, training us in how to use Hangouts properly, all of these kind of things that just effort really, because they were interested in making this work. So that was hugely significant. Now we chose Google Apps for Education because of the fact that it is built for our needs pretty much. It's free, which is quite important, well, free at the point of use anyway, platform agnostic, so it works on everything, browser based, and essentially it reduced the technical issues that we were expecting to have to just 2, and those issues were, is the school's internet any good? Is the school's wireless any good? And if those 2 things could be ticked, all of the rest of the problems you typically get with a technology project kind of went away. We layered Chromebooks on top of that for the same reasons. They just work, they only do one thing, they're easily controlled, they're light. In the UK they retail at about £200, which means that they're pretty cheap. And children like using them. Hangouts was the core of the lesson, as you saw. It's one of the restrictions of it is it only allows 15 participants at a time, but interestingly all the research around this shows that class sizes of about 15 work best for online learning, so that was a happy choice. And slides and docs and sheets were the core of the delivery and the collaborative tasks. Just as we were kicking off, Google released a tool from Google Classroom. If you've seen it, it's brilliant for workflow. It helps children to have teachers to create tasks, issue them, and children to complete those tasks, complete them and to send them back. And I really recommend that you take a look at it if you can. And finally, the last piece of that puzzle was something called Panopto. Panopto is the only thing we had to pay for. It's the lesson capture software that's used mostly in universities. It's well worth it because of the functionality it gave us, but we're hoping that in future Google's Hangouts on Air, such as the one you're watching now, if they can make that capable of being private within a domain, that would take away the need for us to spend quite a lot of money on a piece of software that essentially does the same thing. So what are we doing now? Moving towards the close of our presentation. We're almost there. How are we going about it at the moment? Well, we're moving away from a after-school model, trying to integrate into school lessons now. And we're going to be offering 2 A-Levels from September 2015 to all of the students who are in the sixth form in any of our schools at United Learning. We asked our head teachers what they would value. They told us that the main shortage subjects were physics and economics. So we've recruited great teachers, and Rob is going to be teaching the physics, unsurprisingly, and another colleague is joining one of our academies, Paddington Academy, in June to teach the economics of a similar high calibre. We are delivering those in the mornings, 9 o'clock, because you can imagine the problems of trying to get different schools to agree timetable slots, so we're keeping it quite open. But we're also running an after-school session as well for schools that are really finding it hard to make the leap to integrating something that's online into their taught curriculum. We have focused it on awesome teachers. That's absolutely at the heart of this. I mean, I want to be very clear, this isn't as good as face-to-face teaching. It obviously isn't as good as face-to-face teaching, but it's not trying to be. It's trying to be better than no teaching at all, which is what some of these children had. So having great teachers is the fundamental heart of it still. I've mentioned timetabled lessons. The children will also have timetabled study time, so they're going to have 3 taught hours a week. So let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 o'clock for an hour, they're going to be in that lesson. But they're also going to have at least an equal amount of time to do the flipped bit of the learning and the follow-up tasks in school. And something we learned from the pilot as well that we'd always suspected would be true, but it's quite important actually, to have an on-site facilitator. So what that means is another adult who's around to help these children. And if there are multiple children from the same school doing the same course, that adult should probably be in the room with them when they're doing the actual lesson, just to make sure that behaviour is sensible. And when they're not doing the lesson, they need to be around to solve problems, to help them with technical things, or just to point them in the right direction if they're stuck on things. Because with the best will in the world, it's not always possible to get access to one of the teachers virtually. And what are the lessons that we've learned? Well, This, by the way, that picture is two of the students who took part in the GCSE astronomy trial presenting for Google at an international IT show that we have in the UK called BET in January. And they were full of enthusiasm for what it had helped them to do. So one of the important lessons that we've learned is that most of the problems and issues we've come up against have been human, not technical. We thought they would be technical. They were solved pretty quickly. It's things like children needing to, being selected for the rugby team and not being able to come to the lesson, or teachers saying that's not as important as your maths, you need to come to a maths session after school instead. So those kind of issues have been much more challenging than the technical ones. The pupils that we're trying to recruit at A-Level are quite risk averse, and understandably so. This is a big thing for them. They don't really want to roll the dice and hope it comes up a 5 or a 6 on some new untried concept. So we've actually had to do quite a lot of work to help children understand how this would work, what it would look like, and the only thing really that's convinced those children that they want to try this way of learning has been the quality of teacher that they'll have access to. That's really been the thing that's sold it. Some things still don't work very well, and we'd like them to be better. So languages, particularly, we'd love to be able to teach French, German, Spanish, subjects that often at A-Level have 1 or 2 students taking part, and they really don't work face-to-face with 1 or 2 students. So if we could spread that out and have 10 or 20 students doing that, that'd be great. But language teaching relies on a lot of people talking to each other quite a lot. So in Hangouts, what that would mean would be lots of separate breakout rooms, and Hangouts just isn't capable of doing that unless you do some really kind of complex scheduling of different Hangouts. So we're hoping that will evolve. We started off by having lots of kind of clever setup with different cameras and with the teacher front and center, and rapidly learned that just didn't matter. What was important was the content, and actually having the teacher down the bottom, nice and small, was actually quite democratizing, and the students felt more involved because they were all on the same level. It wasn't, you will listen to the adult now. Another great thing that we did actually read about in the literature before we discovered for ourselves is that if you have a face-to-face kickoff and regular, I said regular, once or twice meetings, then that builds enormous amounts of trust. If you don't have those face-to-face elements, groups of people coming together online do find it much, much harder to empathize and to work together. So the very first thing we did with these astronomy students is take them to the Greenwich Royal Astronomy Observatory in London and have a kind of kick-off day together, and that really helped to build that trust. This shouldn't surprise anyone. There's lots of students, well, I say lots, one student of the 8 who did that trial just didn't want to do it. They just didn't like learning that way. The myth of digital natives is a myth. I'm sure most of you have come to that conclusion for yourselves. Just because people were born 15 years ago doesn't mean they actually have a natural facility with technology. So some students just much prefer to learn in different ways. It's not going to work, we don't think, for the bright but lazy type of student. So actually the kind of student I was, but so maybe not bright, but I was certainly lazy, I would have fallen badly at this, because it does require you to actually to go away and do the work. You can't just busk by and turn up at the lessons because the content's too hard. And finally, for teachers. Now Rob, as I've said at the beginning, he's an extraordinary teacher, but he found it tough. You're dealing with lots of information coming at you from different angles. You've got that chat window, you've got technical issues to oversee and resolve potentially, you've got to try and be a teacher, you've got to keep an eye on each individual participant. He says it's the toughest lesson of the week for him. Conversely though, there are some teachers who in traditional environments might struggle, particularly if they're great subject experts but just struggle with the behaviour management aspect of teaching. There aren't really any behaviour issues in this model. Well, if there are, there's nothing you can do about it because they're hundreds of miles away. So it's interesting that certain teachers who you wouldn't necessarily think would be a good fit might be quite good here. And finally then, where are we going next? Well, I've said we're doing 2 A-levels from this September. We're launching another 2 on top of that next September. Maths and further maths, which again, hard to staff, hard to teach well, the gateway to so many good careers and university courses. And then we'll have 4 running live, and we'll see where we go from there. We're going to start involving external expert speakers a lot. This way of delivery really lends itself to having people from research laboratories and the department for whatever in government. If we've got the human connections, that's the hard bit. Getting those people to drop into a Hangout once every 6 months actually would be quite simple and would add a lot of value. We are trying to take this forward for teacher development as well, to use United Classroom as a way of training teachers, which has got some interesting connotations. And finally, if this proves to be really successful, it may be commercially viable outside the group. So there could be a future where children who aren't at United Learning Schools come and do courses through United Classroom. That is potentially possible. A bit problematic legally in this country at the moment. So there may be time for questions. I'll just leave you with our Twitter handles and a website you can go to watch a video and see a bit more information, because we are out of time. Bruce, do you want to pass any questions to me?
Thanks, Dominic. Well, I've been monitoring the chat line there. I've put up a prompt for people to ask questions. There aren't any at the moment. I'm guessing there may be a wee bit of a delay on the line. There's about a minute or two delay, so nothing to ask you. I could ask you, but I already know the answer. I guess we could stay online for a few minutes just in case anything comes through on the chat, and we can answer questions. But
sure. Okay. What I will do is I'll go to the next slide, which has a really cheesy video that we put together as a way of explaining the concept, and I'll let that play out. You might not hear the sound. That's probably enough of that. Okay, so there is a mechanism for you to ask questions after the fact. That's one of the joys of Hangouts on Air. You can just review this, watch it in a month's time or whatever, and leave a question, and we'll be able to answer those. So we're going to hang up now. Thanks very much for your patience. Please get in touch on Twitter if you've got any specifics you'd like to ask us. And thank you, Bruce, for facilitating.
thanks, Dominic, and thanks everyone.
Yeah.